Okay, how are you doing? Welcome to the studio.
I'm doing good. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
You've made it. You've made it through the heat of LA. I mean, it must be a little difficult than Portugal, right?
Well, I actually came here from Las Vegas, and
That's hot.
yeah, I've never been there, but I was just working, so I literally didn't see anything. But then I decided to do the drive to LA and go through Death Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And when I stopped at the viewpoint, it was so I work in degrees Celsius.
Me too. I'm from Canada, so
Okay.
bring on the degrees. Forget our American
Okay.
audience here. Yeah.
So it was 49
Mm-hmm.
when I got out, and it made me think a lot of my husband's country, Namibia, which is also very desert.
Yeah.
But it was beautiful,
Mhm.
a lot hotter than here.
I spent most of COVID living in Dubai.
Oh.
So I'm used to that like desert heat, right? And that's what you get in Death Valley and that whole area around
Yes.
Nevada. It's pretty intense.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
very similar to Namibia. They also have like just sand and heat.
Yeah. I've always wanted to film in Namibia, and I actually had an episode totally planned out. We were going to shoot it in April or May 2020,
Yeah.
and I had already talked to the government, already talked to the tourism bureau, already had some guides and everything, and we were going to do this like 2-week hiking, trekking thing along the Skeleton Coast in Namibia.
Oh, I should put you in contact with my husband because his family, like, they did a lot of things of development and so on in Namibia. And his brother-in-law's father is one of the most famous geologists there, and he knows like everything about the land and how it was made, and they do a lot up and down the Skeleton Coast.
Mm.
So yeah, those are the people to talk to.
I'll definitely get the names from you off there, but that'd be great because I mean it's just so remote and so magical, and then you get this like South Atlantic crushing up against the African continent, and the way
Yeah.
the desert meets the ocean, and the shipwrecks and the wildlife. It's just idyllic. It sounds.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. Like it's a different view. But I remember the first time I went there, somebody told me Namibia is one of those countries that you go and you love it and you love it forever, or you hate it and you never ever like it. I was in the last category.
Okay.
I liked to see grass and greenery.
Mhm.
And yeah, there's a lot of sand.
People say the same thing about LA. How's LA treating you so far?
Actually, very green. Maybe
Yeah.
it's just where I've been, but there seems to be all these palm trees and beautiful greenery, shrubs everywhere.
In this neighborhood, yeah, it's quite nice.
Yeah, yeah. I really haven't been to many places here.
If you don't have to drive, like, or commute to work,
Yeah.
LA is like a really nice 12-month-a-year destination. I mean, it's getting hot, so July and August can be quite hot if you don't
Yeah.
have air conditioning, or like this place is kind of like one floor is kind of below ground and then the other floor is above ground, so it's quite chill and cool during the daytime. But I know a lot of people suffer with the heat here if you're further inland or
Yeah.
out by like Santa Monica, Venice Beach, Malibu. Now is the best time to be out by the water because you get a nice breeze and stuff like that.
Oh, cool. Okay, I will remember that because now I think the most I've seen of LA is the traffic. I've been stuck in it every day forever.
Yeah. I think that's what wears people down. But so you're not from Namibia. Your husband's from Namibia, but where are you from?
South Africa.
Okay, and which city in South Africa?
I was born in Vereeniging, which is about an hour and a little bit from Pretoria.
Okay.
But I spent most of my life in Pretoria. That's where I started my career and where I exited from when we immigrated to Portugal.
All North American people don't know anything about South Africa. This I found.
Yeah.
I've been to South Africa a few times myself.
Did you like it?
I did like it a lot, actually. I think the people are really warm and wonderful. The hospitality is pretty amazing. And then, of course, you've got this kind of like just politics kind of ruins everything. And
Yeah.
the economy is a mess and corruption's everywhere. But the people like are incredible. And, of course, that should be the backbone of every great nation. But, of course, politicians like to mess things up. And people here don't understand that. Like people in the United States are totally blind to the issues of other countries. And it's always been one of the fascinating things because I lived in China for many years and then in the Middle East and now coming back to the United States. It's amazing how focused everyone is just on what life is like here. And they don't know anything about South Africa except, oh, Nelson Mandela was the president once.
Yeah. I lived here for a while. And the family I lived with told me, well, the two things we know about South Africa is diamonds and Nelson Mandela. I'm like, okay, there's a lot more to South Africa than that. But that's very true.
a proud sporting nation too. I remember I have a friend, one of my best friends in high school, Charles. He was from South Africa. He had to bring like Springbok tattoo on his chest because we played rugby together.
Rugby.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's our big sport. We still watch it. We stream it in Portugal, and everybody thinks we're crazy because it's so brutal. It's like, no, that's real sport.
That is real sport. That's a good way. Everyone thinks American football players are tough, but no.
No, we have no protection. They just go for it.
So what was it like growing up in South Africa, just outside Pretoria?
It was pretty normal, I think. We were not in a small town, but a big-ish town, but definitely not a city. And we had a pretty normal upbringing. I had issues like everybody else, I think. But the town where we lived, everything was kind of not within walking distance, but it was a close drive.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhat of a close-ish community. And
this was still during apartheid South Africa?
No.
Oh, this is post-apartheid?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. So apartheid ended in 1994, so I would have been then 9 years old. So I basically grew up in post-apartheid South Africa, which is another thing people misunderstand because there's a lot of judgment, obviously, about that and a lot of feelings. And my generation of youth in South Africa is very opposed to those kind of views because we feel we weren't part of that. And we all just want to work together to make the country the best that it can be, whatever that means and whatever you look like and sound like. And like, we just all want to be together as one. But then, unfortunately, we have this very older generation that's still kind of stuck in the political chairs and main seats, and it's just making everything very complicated.
I think having old people set in their ways, running countries, no matter what color you are or what religious background you are or what your ethnicity is or whatever, having these 80-year-old people run our countries is not the answer.
No, but we've actually had a huge change now because we just had our national elections in May, and it's the first time ever that the ruling party has, I think, done this badly. So they've actually formed a coalition with the party that they most oppose. So we'll see. We're not sure what that means yet because there isn't really a legal definition for what they're trying to do. But let's see if good comes from it.
Hopefully, it's the beginning of a bit of change.
I hope so.
Yeah.
At least electricity would be good. Yeah.
Yeah. The load shedding or the blackouts, like we call them here, like they happen multiple times a day in South Africa for no reason at all.
Yeah. Yeah. My sister lives on a farm and she says they've just kind of given up on buying new fridges and everything because they just break with all the power cuts. Like everything just, shorts out and blows up. So they just don't do it anymore.
My friend, he's a boxer. He lives in Johannesburg, and his whole house is run on generators. He doesn't even depend on the electrical grid anymore because it's too up and down. And he buys food, and then the power goes off for 4 hours, and all the food goes bad. So he has his whole house on diesel generators.
Yeah, that must cost him a fortune. I don't even want to think about it. But of course, now generators and solar panels, the price has just gone insane because everybody needs it and everybody wants it. Yeah.
It's funny. I grew up. I grew up in Canada, but I lived in China from like 22 to like 40, and
that's a stretch in Asia. Yeah. Okay.
It was a stretch, but I was always interested because China and South Africa both have capital controls on their currency. So if you make $100,000 a year in China, you actually can't take that money out of China. You can only take out a certain amount every year once you've proven you've paid tax on it, stuff like that. And South Africa is the same. So it's impossible to make money in South Africa and get it out of South Africa. And this is like whenever I talk to my boxing friend or some other friends, they're like, oh, I want to invest in other countries or do things in other places, and they can't even get their money out of South Africa. It's crazy.
Yeah, I know, it's really difficult. My husband has now gone through the whole tax divorce procedure. And I mean, I'm not even going to tell you what that costs. It's horrifying. And it was, I think, a 2-year process.
For a tax divorce.
Yeah.
But let's get back to you. So what are your earliest memories of growing up in South Africa?
Well, I've always been a very anxious child. So I was thinking about it the other day. Like, I could never remember my first memory because everybody always talks about their first memory. And I'm thinking, I really don't have a first memory. And I've been going through a lot of healing the last couple of months, well, the last couple of years, really. And my first memory, I realized, is actually of having an anxiety attack. I was probably around 5 years old, I think. And I remember I was just standing in front of the basin and like splashing my water with, my face with cold water. And what I didn't realize then, but know now, hyperventilating. And I can't remember why. It's just that is my first memory. I've always been wired that way. So even if that's my first memory, it kind of says it all.
What was it like growing up with that kind of anxiety? I mean, that must have been crippling.
Yeah, that was a hard part because I grew up in a house with a lot of generational trauma, and I didn't have words to put to that, so I didn't know how to explain that. And there was a lot of mental illness in my family that went undiagnosed, so there was a lot of bizarre behavior in my house. And I didn't know any better. I just thought everybody's family is this way, and everybody goes through this, and this is what it's like in everybody's house. So I don't think I ever wondered about it. I just always felt very different. And I was always told I'm super sensitive, I cry too much, I stress too quickly. So I just kind of came to the conclusion I'm wrong and I need to fix myself.
And this was before the era of social media.
That's way before the era of social media.
Before mental health and insecurity and all this.
No, way before any of that.
Oh, wow. Where did you stand as a young teenager in South Africa dealing with all this anxiety and all this stress and all this tension?
I think if I look back on it, it was pretty hard because I didn't really know how to deal with that. And just before, I think I was 9 or 10 years old, we moved into my grandparents' house and we built them like a granny flat in the back of our garden. Like their door was probably like 100 meters from our front door. And my mom worked all day. We fell into some financial difficulties and my dad had to move away to work somewhere else to be able to send money home. And that's my stepdad. So he came home maybe every second weekend, sometimes less, until I left for college. My mom was trying to do the best she could. And I stayed with my grandfather. And there was a period of probably 3 or 4 years that I was sexually abused by him, living in the same garden, being stuck there all day long. And when I entered my teenage years, he wasn't removed from the property. So that was very awkward for me because I went through all of my like puberty, first boyfriend, all of the hormones and emotions with my abuser having like a front row seat to all of it. And nobody obviously knew. Again, it was such a common thing in my upbringing and, again, the generational trauma. I just thought everybody's house was like this. Everybody's grandfather is like this. There's nothing strange or weird about this. So at school and socially, I found it very difficult because how do you explain that to somebody that's more normal than you are? You just don't. So I struggled to fit in. I was always very anxious. I didn't make friends easily. Was very lonely.
The trust issues alone would have set you back like decades of trying to make friends and trust like anyone.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Is there anyone? I mean, I'm not too familiar about the way South Africa as a country deals with sexual abuse or and things like this. But like, are there hotlines to call? Are there people to talk to at school if you're a young person?
I think now yes, but then maybe not. And I also think, like, my parents didn't really know how to deal with it because there was also kind of this other dynamic of them being divorced and, it being difficult and me being told don't tell because I think my mom was afraid my dad would take me away from her if he had known. And I was just told, well, if it happens again, get up and phone the police, which, is impossible to do because when you're in that situation, you're just so frozen and you're just so scared. Like a grown woman would struggle to do that. So,
let alone a child.
A 10-year-old child, that's just such a tall order. So maybe now, yes, but then for sure there was not, I think, anything that could be done.
And I mean, like, how did you go to school and look at all the other kids knowing that you would go home and be sexually abused or something like that at the end of the day? Like, did you just assume all the girls at school would had similar living situations and had like other family members that were maybe abusing them? Or did you ever did you ever talk about it at school with anyone?
No, I know. That was the big thing. Don't tell. And I had that message from many sides, not just from my abuser. And in the beginning, I thought, like I said, everybody's family is this way. And then when I started to realize, okay, something is not right because everybody else seems a little bit more normal than me. And if you go for sleepovers and everything, you know, their parents just act differently. The house is just different. And then I started to get really resentful because I think in my young mind, I couldn't understand what was I doing wrong, because obviously you put it on yourself for this to be happening to me, and what were they doing right to be able to be raised in like a very safe environment and not having to deal with this every day.
I mean, I mean, obviously at 10 years old, I guess you're way too young, but if you were 14, 15 or 16, would there even be like options to see a therapist or even like talk to someone kind of independent from your family members, just someone to actually talk to?
Yeah, that happened a bit later in my life. So probably when I became a teenager. At that point, the abuse mostly stopped, but he continued to live with us. So I went to a therapist then for a while. I can't really remember a lot of that part of my life. I think I blocked a lot of things out. But when I became a young adult, when I went to university in my first year, Did
you travel away for university?
Yes, I left as soon as I could. Like that was I couldn't wait to leave home. And it was like my ticket to freedom, you know. And I worked really hard to get into university. I always knew I wanted to do law. So I left, I went to university, and just after my exams for my first year, I went to visit a very trusted family member. And unfortunately, that night he sexually assaulted me, and that just broke the dam. Like everything I'd been holding inside and not been dealing with, I think just released.
So you not only had your grandfather at home when you were a young person and in your high school years, but then in university too, you went to another trusted family member who then also abused you.
Yes. And
that's terrible.
I know. That was not a great time in my life, but it was necessary because I think I didn't know what to do with all of those emotions, and I was different because I was older and I understood that it was wrong, and I immediately told, and nobody believed me, you know, because he was just such a trusted person in our inner circle, and I was told that maybe I imagined it or I interpreted it the wrong way.
Oh my God, what an insult.
And then he called me, I think a week or two after, and he was like, okay, he just wants to make sure I'm not going to tell anybody because, you know, he has kids, he's got a wife. And that kind of solidified it for me. And then, you know, the dam broke and everybody kind of believed me. And I went into a deep downward spiral. I tried to take my own life. I was committed to a psychiatric hospital for a month.
And this is still all in South Africa?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And after that, I just had the worst time to try and get back into a really good space. I failed all my classes. And I was a straight A student. Like, I did really well.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of stuff just derails your entire life. Like, you don't know who to trust. You don't know who you can talk to. I mean, this is what I've learned through listening to other people's experiences. It hasn't happened to me, but I think I even think maybe there's an even worse barrier or even a worse downfall that can happen to you when it's someone that you trust and someone that you know, right? Because I think some people, maybe especially nowadays, they expect an assaultant to be someone maybe they don't know.
Yeah.
Because then it's, you know, it's more random and more by chance, right? Like, it's almost like that's easier to live with. I mean, it's terrible, but maybe it's almost better but when it's someone that you know, someone that you trust, someone in your family, That's got to be devastating to try to deal with.
Yeah, I think the worst part of that is the why. Like constantly questioning yourself. Did I do something? Was it something I said? Why? Like, why would this happen? Why would this person do it? And that question kind of drives you crazy because you just never know. You can't be in somebody else's mind and you can't possibly understand what they were thinking. So I learned a lot of hard lessons to try and let that question go and just kind of float away in the wind.
Mm-hmm.
And not hold on to that because I will never find peace in that. I will never know why, all I can do is just do my best for now.
That's terrible that you were assaulted and then you had to go to a psychiatric hospital and not the people who assaulted you. Like, do you find the irony in that? Like, here you are, the victim, trying to work your way through living a normal life, and these people take advantage of you, family members.
Yeah.
And then you're the one that has to, go away for a month and figure it all out while they're still out free.
Yeah, it was really difficult because I remember when I was admitted to the hospital, I was devastated. I was crying and I was begging my mom, please don't leave me here. And, I don't mean to sound offensive or anything, but this was what was going on in my mind at that moment is I just kept telling her, I'm not crazy, don't leave me here. I've just been really hurt, like I don't know what to do. And it was a very difficult experience because it was it wasn't just for patients dealing with kind of mental issues, but also for young kids going through drug rehabilitation. So I was in a room with a girl that was coming off of a heroin addiction, and she was really sick, and it was really not a pretty picture. And that really derailed me because I was trying to figure out what was happening to me, what had happened to me, why am I stuck here? I'm on so much medication. It's my body, but I don't get to choose because my parents chose, what was given to me and what was not. And, I have this going on, like in the bed next to me. It was really very, very difficult.
And you're like 20 years old.
Yeah, I was 20.
Without any skills or knowledge of how to tackle that situation or that feeling or that knowledge of what's happened to you.
Nothing, absolutely nothing. But as hard as that was, it helped me. It gave me the courage to try when I came out because, as I said, I had failed everything. I went from straight A's to failing. And that was, I think, in the third semester. So I had one more semester to try and make it up. And when I came out, I just decided, look, I can't do this. I don't want this to be my life. I've seen this picture. I've seen this story. I've run away from it. Like, I can't do this. And I just put everything I had into my studies. Like, I think that was like my escape. And I managed to pass all my subjects, some of them even with distinctions. And from there on, like many people in my life told me, I became very hard. But I think it's more a protective layer of, I don't know how else to protect myself other than kind of putting up this wall around the people that I felt I trusted and no longer could. And just doing what I know I can do to help myself steer the direction of my life in a different way.
It's terrifying how family members can play beautiful roles in your life and then also be completely destructive.
Yeah. It's hard to kind of correlate those because I think especially for one's parents, you have such love and appreciation for them. And it's just normal for a child to put your parent on a pedestal. Like, I get so terrified when my little girl does that with me because I'm so terrified for the moment that she realizes,
we're all just trying to make it through and we don't know what's going on.
I'm definitely not the Disney princess she thinks I am. So it's very hard to do that. And I'm still on a healing journey. It's definitely not, it's not a destination for me. I will always be on this journey, I think.
I always find it incredibly challenging when it comes to choosing your friends. You can make mistakes choosing friends, right? You think, oh, these people are nice, I'll hang out with them, then they hurt you, you cut them out of your life, you move on, right? It can be traumatic, it can be difficult, but they're friends, they're not family, right? but you don't choose your family. Like, it's a lottery ticket, right? You get born into it, and you just have no fucking choice who your family members are. And then when they do something like that to you, it must just not make any fucking sense. Like, it must be just shocking.
It brings you back to that question that drives you crazy, the why.
Yeah.
And like, really, that's been a big part of my healing journey is just focusing so much energy and effort on letting go of that question, because I will never have a resolution for that. So, I can either do what I can with what I have, or I can get stuck in that vicious circle. And that's really not a fun place to be.
No. I mean, when did you decide to use the trauma in your life to build, a business helping other people around it? Because I find this kind of transition to be interesting. Like, how long did it take you to kind of build that narrative or build that idea of having that career?
It actually started in high school, because I think to get away, I was doing a lot outside the hours of school, extramural activities and things like that. And I was always involved in the outreach programs. And I think we had a program where we used to go to old age homes and give them gifts and birthday cake and things like that. And I always knew I wanted to go into law, and I always knew I wanted to do human rights. Like, all my friends, when we graduated, had this stress of they were trying to apply to the big 5 law firms, and they're stressed if they're getting an interview. And I just cared if legal aid was going to have enough funding in their budget for another intern. And I think it gave me a sense of peace in that I felt like I was directly dealing with my trauma by working with other people that had similar traumas. And I just kind of threw myself into that. And when I finished my articles and I went on to become a lawyer, I did my PhD in international criminal and humanitarian law. So I worked with the laws of war and what happens to civilians during times of war. I worked a lot in the African development countries and a lot with women's rights and women's abuse issues. So it was so close to home for me. And it just always felt like I was in a way addressing what had happened to me. And it was only really in 2015, when I was like officially diagnosed with panic disorder, that I stopped and thought to myself, okay, so I've been running away from this for quite a time. And not only have I been running away, I've been putting all this extra trauma on myself, because I thought that it was helping me, but actually it was just almost re-traumatizing me. So, I had to make some difficult choices.
Because when you're, I guess, I'm looking at this from the outside, and I don't necessarily understand, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess when you're helping other people with their traumatic issues, you're just kind of brushing over your own issues, right?
Yeah.
It's just kind of like putting a Band-Aid on, right? You're not doing a deep dive on yourself and actually repairing anything inside. You're just kind of helping other people, and you know how they feel, but you actually aren't repairing anything for yourself.
Yeah, that's very true. And in many instances, I think I handled it very badly because I was wired this way, and because I came at it from this viewpoint. I think I got way too emotionally involved in many cases, because I felt like I really understood. And it was difficult for me to have that disconnect between, where one ends and one begins.
Like an objectivity, like a legal objectivity.
Correct. Yeah, my empathy meter was way, way off, and it still is. I have to be very careful with where I spend my energy and how I direct it.
Well, there's no roadmap for what you went through, right? Like, there's no one to sit down with you and say, this is terrible. I've worked with many people who have gone through what you've gone through. This is how you should try to manage it. Like, you were just totally alone. I mean, that must have just been so hard to manage on your own, with your own skills, because you didn't have the skills to fix yourself, treat yourself, work through the trauma, right? Like, you can't do that alone.
Yeah, I think that's why it was so hard before I was diagnosed, because...
And what exactly were you diagnosed with?
Panic disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So before I knew this, I just always thought, like I said, I was wrong. I I would get sick really often, like food poisoning type of sickness. Like 2 or 3 times a month, I would be down for 3 days, vomiting, not feeling well. I had really sensitive skin. I had intense migraine attacks that took me to the ER. So I just always thought I was really badly put together, because all of these things are happening to me. And it was all anxiety, which was undiagnosed. But I also had a great fear of getting diagnosed because you have to remember I had this period where I tried to take my own life. I was in the psychiatric facility. If I had to go to a therapist again, I'm going to have to tell them that. And obviously in my mind, I thought, okay, they're definitely going to then think something is wrong with me. And I had this history of mental illness in my family, very strong history of that. And that's a fear because now you're thinking, okay, am I the same? Is it happening to me? So that it was very hard to navigate that before I was diagnosed, and it really had a lot of physical manifestations in my life.
I can't imagine the stress and the anxiety you must have been feeling at that time, right? Because here you are, you're kind of afraid of your family, and then you're also kind of afraid of the doctors. Like everywhere you look, you were just kind of afraid of everyone because of what they could say about you, or or your background, or whatever, right? Like you literally had no one to turn to. So who did you end up actually turning to?
Yeah, not even friends, right? Because you don't want your friends that. Yeah. You want your friends to feel you're normal.
Well, normal in air quotes, yeah.
Yeah. No, I met my husband, and he has been an amazing support system for me. My life changed completely when he came on the scene. A lot of difficult things happened because a lot of people in my life were not very happy with the role he was taking on. This kind of protector and very strong about it.
Yeah, because people have been abusing you your whole life, and if they can't abuse you anymore, they must
enough. Like yeah. If you want anything from her, you've got to come through me, and that really didn't go down well at all. But yeah, that changed a lot for me, and he still is a very big support system to me. So he's my rock, my sounding board, and he kind of went on the journey with me to find good people to help me, good therapists, a good psychiatrist, people that work with me, that understand me, that I feel comfortable with saying, listen, this isn't working for me, or I feel strange on this, or can you see me today or tomorrow? And I mean, in the beginning when I was diagnosed, he went with me to therapy, which is a lot of times something, no offense, but a guy won't do, right?
Yeah.
Well, no partner really, because the idea would be, look, you're the one with the issues, not me. Well, you go to therapy.
I think also too, there's a even though you're intimate and you're married and you're a partner with someone too, I think there's also a privacy issue. Like there might be even things that you don't want necessarily to have to admit to your partner, or in that kind of setting, right? I think that's like, in my mind, that's like the ultimate intimacy.
Yeah. And that helped me a lot on my healing journey, because the reason he came with me was purely to understand, because when I was diagnosed, we didn't know what was happening. We thought I was dying because, I went for cardiac tests. I went for, the camera that you swallow, for brain scans, everything. Because the first time I had a panic attack, I was away for work. And I wasn't in a good area. And I thought I was having a stroke. I mean, my hands went numb, my feet went numb, I couldn't swallow, I had heart palpitations, I couldn't see, my vision went away. I asked them to phone the ambulance. It was difficult to get to the hospital. They wouldn't help me. They thought I was on drugs. It was a horrible experience. And
all of those from the people who were supposed to help you.
Yes. And I mean, I don't even know how he found me, because it was like a 2-hour flight, but somehow my husband found me and he flew down and he came and fetched me. I was like in the hospital ward in a gown in somebody else's blood. It was really not a pretty picture. So yeah, we didn't think it was anxiety. We thought like something is wrong with me neurologically, something with my heart. So when we now settled on, okay, maybe I have panic disorder, it was really important for him to understand, okay, what does that mean? What does that do to my body? What does that do to my emotions? How can he help me when that happens? And that helped me because I also didn't know. Like it didn't help to look to me for a solution because I also didn't know what would help me. And it was new to me as well. It was scary. It was frightening. And the fact that he went through that journey with me really made a difference.
I mean, yeah. I mean, that's the ultimate partner, right? To have someone that's going to help you to get through all that. I'm curious, like, how long did it take you to trust your husband to unpack all of that stuff? I mean, like when you were dating.
Yeah.
I mean, here you are. You have this stuff behind you in your life that has shaped who you are today, for better or worse. For worse, obviously, in your case. That you'd been through, that you're carrying with you into this relationship. I mean, how hard was it to trust your then boyfriend, future husband, and to get that to a point where you could trust him, where you could tell him all the terrible things that your family members had done to you?
So I actually met him on my 20th birthday, and this was just after the incident in the hospital. So I think
that's guardian angel timing.
Yeah, but I think everybody around me knew something was off with me, obviously. He never asked, but we just always had this kind of connection. Like our friends would leave when we had a barbecue and we'd end up talking until 3 or 4 a.m. and it was always easy. But when we got married, we had a real rocky beginning the first couple of years because trust was a very big issue to me. Not just from that, but I mean, I come from a bitterly divorced home. And I mean, my parents are still bitterly divorced. My dad's been married, I think, 5 times. I've seen what it's like to get divorced at 40 and have nothing and have to start everything over and move back in with your parents. So I had that as well. So I didn't trust him with our money. I didn't trust him making decisions financially. I didn't trust him, intimately. It was very difficult. It was a difficult time to go through. But it's like he went into it, if I look back on it now, knowing this. And I was so blind to it, like I didn't. And he just handled it so well, like the way he steered through those years. We were actually talking about it the other day. It's quite brilliant how he did that. I don't think I would have stayed with me, to be completely honest.
Yeah, that would have been very challenging, kind of getting married to someone knowing that the marriage isn't the end of the road, right? It's the beginning of the recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And since then, I've learned that, as I said, recovery, especially for me, it's not a destination. It's always going to be a journey. And I had a very hard time accepting that, but I'm getting more comfortable with it now. Maybe it's because I'm getting older, or maybe it's because I'm tired. I don't know.
It takes a lot of energy to be angry.
It does. It takes a lot of energy to be angry, but it takes a lot of energy to have resentment.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you kind of get worn out.
Being angry and resentful all the time. Yeah. No, I can believe it. I'm very curious as to your transition, like where you kind of got out of law and got out of helping people and started like maybe working on yourself more.
Yeah.
Like what was the switch that flipped inside you that made you want to have to get away from that world and focus more on who you wanted to become?
So I was diagnosed in 2015. And when I was diagnosed, I was still in the human rights field. I had my own human rights consultancy. It was very successful. I worked super hard for it. I was so proud of it. And
this is still in South Africa?
Yeah. And the first thing I told my husband when I was diagnosed was like, nobody can know. I mentor people for a living. This is like the definition of imposter syndrome, because here I am with an anxiety disorder. And also the legal profession is not really the space where you go and say, oh, I have a problem with stress, which anxiety is not just stress. It's completely different. So even though I was diagnosed, I mismanaged it completely.
I don't think anyone knows how to manage that kind of diagnosis, though. I mean,
No.
like, it's a heavy weight to bear, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I was bargaining with it. Like, okay, I'm going to run at 200 kilometers an hour for the next month. And then, like, I will succumb to whatever happens to my body for the next 2 weeks. And then I'm going to do it all over again.
That makes sense, though, too, because you're just avoiding it, right? Like, you're just putting yourself into your work and avoiding yourself and your own problems, and you're just drowning yourself in the work. So that makes sense. But it was killing you slowly.
Yeah, it had a devastating effect. So when we moved to Portugal in 2020, um, we literally landed with all our things a week before global lockdown. Um, and then many things kind of coincided to what I call my breaking. Like, I think it all came to a head, and I started having rolling panic attacks every day. Everything came to a standstill, obviously, in COVID. I worked in the human rights space, which is completely founded on donor funds, and obviously sponsorships, donor funds, and all of these things dried up. So that was difficult to navigate, and I think that obviously exacerbated what I was already feeling.
And also, too, during COVID, and this is just a little aside, my story, I was stuck in Istanbul for 4 months. I was filming in Ethiopia during the lockdown, when it locked down, and then I couldn't get back to Dubai, which is where I was living at the time, and I ended up in Istanbul for 4 months when Turkey locked down. So sorry, I got my cats. But they were the ultimate COVID adventure. But I was doing these COVID calls, so I would do these Instagram lives with people like every day, and it was just like this, but on, staring at your phone because we're all locked down halfway around. But I was chatting with people in South Africa, and they were talking about how domestic abuse went through the roof, how alcoholism went through the roof, and I can't imagine working in like a human rights field or a women's rights field during COVID, in South Africa, where all of these problems are just escalating at a rapid rate. I mean, it got so bad at one stage that they banned alcohol consumption in South Africa because everyone was beating their wives. I mean, that is terrifying.
But that was actually the worst thing they could have done, because have you ever been stuck in a room you can't move from with an alcoholic detoxing?
No, it's got to. I mean, you had the heroin roommate, but I can't imagine.
So yeah, no, that was hard. But I think the hardest thing for me is, like, I couldn't travel to go back and be part of my consultancy there because you were stuck, basically. And a lot of the projects stopped because there wasn't any funding. And I had to go through this transition of, okay, obviously something is really wrong with my body. I have a 3-year-old daughter who's seeing this every day. I can't keep putting this on my loved ones. I can't keep putting this on myself. And I'm fighting kind of this uphill battle with my consultancy at the moment that I cannot win. So what am I going to do, and how am I going to fix this? And, what added to that was kind of the loss of my identity, because we all have identities that we associate with. And the identity I associated with was Dr. Jean-Marie, the human rights person who everybody knew. And I mean, I was at the presidential elections. I was the one to see if it was free or fair. And I went from all of that to being Jeanne, Hof's wife, which there's nothing wrong with. And it's not trying to be vain. It's just you have this idea of who you are, and then that's kind of taken away from you.
Especially when times get tough. Like when you go through real shit, and you went through a ton of terrible things. And then COVID hit. Yeah. And at the time of losing your identity, you also got, you're also going through panic attacks, and you're also going through a global pandemic, in which case no one knew what was going on or what was going to happen. So like that whole thing makes total sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. You got a friend, because I lost my total identity too. Like I went from traveling 300 days a year making adventure television shows all around the world to
being stuck.
Yeah. And I mean, like, yeah, it was crazy to be in one city for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I was there for 4 months. And then it's been 4 years of that. So it's been a total juxtaposition of my my personality, my identity, my ego, like what I could do, what I can't do anymore. It's been a wild ride. I mean, your anxiety attacks and then going into COVID, I mean, that must have set you off.
Yeah, and everything that was familiar to me, my safety nets were gone, right? So I didn't have a therapist in Portugal. I had to start all over again, right? And we were actually stuck in the whole thing of not being able to go anywhere for longer than COVID. Because of COVID, obviously everything in government went sideways. And our permanent residency was part of that. So we could stay in Portugal because they knew everything was waylaid and backed up, but we couldn't leave because if we left, we couldn't come back. And at that stage, everything was there. So I think we were stuck in Portugal for probably 2.5 years without being able to go anywhere.
Wow.
So that added to it all.
Mm-hmm. And were you homeschooling your daughter at this stage? She was what, 3 by 2020 or something like that? Or
yeah, she was like kindergarten, so it wasn't that much of an issue for her. And when we moved there, she had spent her life with our beautiful nanny in South Africa, so we weren't in a rush to get her into kindergarten in any way. So that was a blessing. Mm-hmm. And we met beautiful people there that came and helped us out with her while we were working at home. So that at least went well. But yeah, it was really that period of time where I decided to make the shift. I didn't know what the shift would be yet. I just knew that whatever I was doing wasn't working and that I didn't want the rest of my life to look like this because I was just emotionally exhausted. I was physically exhausted. I was confused. I had this very real realization that there is a very certain type of parental figure I do not want to be for my daughter. And if I don't change this, then I am going to be
like just passing the trauma along.
Correct.
Yeah.
And not dealing with it and taking it out on her because I'm not dealing with my own emotions. So I came to the conclusion that if I do something different with my life, it has to be something that allows me to take ownership of my diagnosis and give me a space where I feel comfortable enough to say, you know what, I'm not okay. That's okay.
We're all not okay. Yeah.
So, just give me a second to breathe and let me just find my path.
Is South Africa this is ridiculous because South Africa is a massive country with lots of people. I'm not sure the exact population, but did you feel more comfortable being more open about your diagnosis and your past in Portugal or in Europe versus doing that in South Africa? And I know you had a different reputation in South Africa, maybe that because of your status as a lawyer and a human rights activist, that would have been maybe not as easy. But if you hadn't had that stature, do you think talking about this in South Africa openly would have been acceptable? Or because I still feel South Africa is quite a patriarchal society. Men and women are not even close to even. And I'm just wondering how your story would have been heard, in South Africa if you tried to speak publicly about it or tried to build a foundation or some kind of help.
Never. I would never have done that because I have too many ties that bind there and I would be too afraid and I would be too stressed. And part of being able to do that in Portugal is I felt like I was doing it, but it wasn't real because, I started the skincare and a podcast and all of these things allowed me to talk about the diagnosis while not really being in the room with anybody. Mm. So it doesn't feel like you're sharing, but you are sharing.
Also too, did you feel some freedom, like you were away from home and
Yes.
You felt like that you had you could build something new?
Yes, for sure.
Mm.
I really felt like it could be a new beginning for me. And it has been in many ways. It's been hard and it's been good and it's been kind and it's been heartbreaking, but it's been something that I've really needed to go through. And I'm just very grateful that I'm hopefully walking to the other side of it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm not a therapist or a psychologist or anything like that, but I moved to China when I was 22, and for no reason. Like, I just kind of went there. I didn't know anyone, didn't speak Chinese, but I felt so free and liberated. And it's funny because people think of China as a communist country where the government controls your life and you can't vote and there's no democracy. But actually, I felt incredibly free, and not that I didn't really, I don't think I had any trauma when I was growing up, although I might have packed it away. But I think I'm okay on that sense. But I just really wanted to like see other parts of the world. And I just remember that freedom and that sense of like, I can do whatever the fuck I want. Like, no one's looking over my shoulder. I talk to my parents once a month just to make sure I'm alive. Like, and then, I just had this freedom to kind of do whatever I wanted, start whatever I wanted, try anything I wanted without that like voice of maybe I'm going to fail and embarrass someone. I don't know. Did you feel like that when you moved to Portugal?
I felt that a lot.
Yeah.
I dealt with that a lot, and it was difficult to kind of build confidence from there and do that. But as soon as I started doing it, I also found some kind of cathartic experience in it, because it became easier and easier and easier to talk about it, one. And two, it was very good for me to learn and see and be involved, which is weird because I was working with it for so many years, but from a more personal perspective, that I'm not alone, because I felt so isolated for so long, especially because of my panic disorder diagnosis. And once I started speaking about it and really explaining what it means and what it is, and starting to learn that there are so many others struggling with this, it really helped me a lot to find community in that.
And it's, I think, when people have these issues in their life or these disorders that go undiagnosed, I think they feel like they don't know what's going on with them, and they put up walls themselves, right? Like you put up all these walls to protect you, but actually the best thing maybe to do is to break them down and to try to communicate. But then it's like, who do you trust, right? And you just end up isolating yourself.
But also, like, you're so confused in your trauma that you don't really know how to do that. You don't know how to identify that. And that's one of the things of panic disorder. Like, as I understand it, I'm also not a doctor, but this is how it's been explained to me, is that panic disorder, while generalized anxiety disorder and other anxiety disorders can be genetic, isn't necessarily genetic. It's born from complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So, people often think if you say panic disorder, it's somebody who has panic attacks. But while that's true, it's much more than that. It's really kind of defined by the fact that you start to change your behavior in order not to have a panic attack again. So, for example, I completely stopped eating for 2 weeks after my diagnosis. I was deathly ill because I had this very real fear that if I somehow had food in my throat, I was going to choke and I wouldn't be able to breathe and I would die. And I know sitting here how weird that sounds, but if you're in that state, you don't have the ability to be rational or reasonable. Like, all of that leaves your mind. Or when you've had a panic attack, one of the things I do is I start isolating and I won't leave the house because I'm trying to avoid overstimulation, which is what you've just been talking about, stuff like all the noise coming in, You don't know how to handle that. And that comes back to your triggers and learning what triggers you and learning how to navigate those and avoid them if and when you can.
At any stage in your therapy, did any therapist recommend you confronting your family about these issues? And did you do it? Never. But obviously your family members are following what you're doing now.
I don't know.
Okay. So have you cut them right out of your life?
No, not at all. I mean, I have no relationship really with my real dad, but that is a story on its own. It's not really related to this. So, but no, I speak to my family. They're part of my life. It's just that, I had to go on a journey to get through this. And I've just learned that it's my story and I need to find peace in my story in a way that resonates for me so that I can find peace in my own life, without trying to hurt anybody or wish anybody ill. It's just I I need to find a way to be calm with where I am at and how I got there.
Mm-hmm. But that, I mean, what you just said that in a very nice and elegant way, but that is really the ultimate test for everyone, like, let alone people who have gone through trauma, right? Like, we're all just trying to live in our own skin,
Yeah.
wake up every day and be useful to our family or our friends or our colleagues, right? And just try to, like you said, like, own your own story and wake up every day knowing who you are and what has happened to you and what you have to do, and just being a useful member of society again, right? Like, that's what we're all trying to do. I guess the deck is just stacked against you when you've had that kind of childhood trauma.
Yeah. But it's good to know that and to remind yourself that we are all just trying. And that's okay, because I think especially when you're wired anxiously, you tend to also be a perfectionist and you put a lot on yourself and you have a lot of self-criticism and a lot of self-doubt and a lot of overthinking. And it helps to kind of normalize the playing field a little bit and just remind yourself that nobody has it figured out. We're all struggling.
Yeah.
So you're not alone.
No. In this town, we're all faking it till we make it. But I also think with regards to our mental health as a collective human society on the planet Earth, we're all also faking our mental health until we make it. Because there's a lot, people who were suffering before COVID have, suffered greatly. But I feel like so much of what people had going into COVID was enhanced by this extra anxiety and extra that was just kind of blown way out of proportion, and it must have just been crippling to some people. Obviously, suicides and things like that went up, and mental health disorders and alcoholism and drug use all went up just as people tried to medicate their way through, this. And I can't imagine already having anxiety and panic attacks and then going into like a 2.5-year lockdown, basically.
Yeah, that was I'm really grateful for my support system in that. That was very difficult. But at the same time, it does also teach you to, or it did put me in a position where I couldn't really run away from it anymore. I was stuck with it. So I either had to face the monster or be captured by it. So, and I'm not sure if I would have had the courage to do that if my life had just gone on as it was before, if it hadn't, forcibly stopped. And and literally my body stopped, everything stopped. Just before I decided the final decision to make a change, I had some kind of episode where like the whole left part of my face went numb and was hanging. It was so weird. I think I looked like Freddy Krueger.
You must have thought you were having a stroke.
Yeah, so it turns out I did have a little stroke.
Oh my God.
But it was brought on by my anxiety. So I really was just in a space where there was no more negotiating. I had no more options. That was the option. But still, if I wasn't forced to stop like that, I think I would have just ignored it and powered through.
You'd be dead by now.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing what the brain controls and what it doesn't. And it's amazing how anxiety affects the brain and then it takes over your entire body.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. And this is something that's frustrating to me because I feel like we've come a long way in the mental health conversation, and there's so much information and news about depression and bipolar and even I don't know why, but there's this huge thing about narcissists and understanding narcissistic abuse and all of that. But anxiety is so misunderstood. It's just cracked up to, you're stressed or you're highly sensitive. And I think the latest stats from the American Anxiety and Depression Association said 6.1 million Americans have generalized anxiety disorder, but 53% of them are undiagnosed.
And they're all walking around not knowing what's going on with them.
Can you imagine living like that and thinking you're wrong or you're broken like the worst for me was always thinking, what was so wrong with me that other people can go through the same amount of stress that I just had and they just handle it so well. They're just fine. but I'm this complete basket case.
Well, I don't think anyone could have gone through what you went through as a child and then been able to deal with that trauma, in a later life. I mean, like what you went through was wholly traumatic. To be around trusted family members and then to be taken advantage of like that. I mean, that sets a tone for the rest of your life that no one could even imagine.
Yeah, that's true. But there are many that have suffered that, and I'm sure many that feel that way. Like, I just don't understand how I fit into this world because I'm just so differently wired than everybody around me.
Well, you're empathetic, right? So you carry it heavily.
Yeah.
So my biggest criticism for people that know me is I have no empathy. And it's a joke.
Definitely not say that about you.
I'm totally different in the podcast studio, where I love meeting, inspiring and amazing people like yourself who have gone through, wonderful, terrible, incredible, difficult things, right? And here there's empathy and there's understanding and things like that. But in my normal life, I'm quite kind of tuned out to it because I think because it was a way of defending everything around me and things were always chaotic and we were always filming and there's always people around. So you kind of just had to cut yourself off at some stage or you'd become so empathetic to so many people that you'd lose what was going on in your own head. So I think I really did become quite cold at that stage. And actually doing this has really helped me come back and actually care about people again.
Open up a little bit.
This is like, I make a joke, like this is my therapy. I enjoy like just listening to people and learning about other people because it's given me like a sense, because you get caught up and you become, I think at some stage doing what I was doing, and I'm sure there's other professions that are involved in that too. You just cut yourself off from caring.
It's easier.
It's so much easier. Yeah.
Protection method.
But again, too, it's just, then it becomes your life, right? And then you don't care about anything. And you just, then it's, I mean, but it's, I think it's way better to feel and work through the feelings than to just put up a wall, right? Because eventually that wall is going to come down. And when it does come down, the sonic boom that goes off inside you is going to be way worse than if you had dealt with it earlier, right? It's just like a buildup.
But that's what, that's the key thing for me in my Anxious Calm community. The first course that I developed there, the course's name is actually The Breaking. And that's all about that. There's this space between breaking and recovery. But we live in a world where we expect it and our doctors expect it. If you're ill or something is wrong, the way to help is, okay, how do I fix this fast? Like, how am I normal again? Like, how do I recover?
Which is totally the wrong way to approach it.
Especially with something like this that's so inside your mind, because there's so much just going on. So to go from this absolute point of overwhelming devastation and not knowing all of these strange symptoms in your body to, okay, what's going to fix you is take this medication, make lifestyle changes, meditate, be more mindful. Like, those sound easy, but if you're in this breaking space, it's impossible for you to even think. Like, you can't even sit still for 30 seconds without thinking you're dying. So to ask you to meditate or to make lifestyle changes, you have to sit in that space and be in that space. Like, Dr. Zeus says in that, the places you will go, he talks about the waiting place, like where you're waiting for a train to come or a plane to go. It's that space, right? So if you don't live through it and experience it and understand and accept that I'm not okay right now, but it's okay because I've recognized that I'm not okay and I'm gonna do something about it, you get stuck there. And that's what happened to me. I didn't know there was this space. And then you get all these false starts, like where you think you're getting better, and then when you relapse, it's so much worse.
1 step forward, 2 steps back.
Exactly. Yeah. And you have to be in that space, because if you're not, you can't, like, if you don't know where you are, you can't possibly know where you're going, right? It's like using Google Maps and not putting in your current location when you're trying to direct yourself somewhere. You have to understand where you're coming from. And that space is just completely missed. and bulldozed over.
I mean, where do you think people are that suffer from a similar anxiety that you have, who don't have the support network that your partner, your husband eventually provided for you? I mean,
Yeah.
it must be devastating for people who haven't found, that rock in their life to hold on to.
Well, that's really why I founded the community, because last year I had a really intense relapse. There was a lot going on, and I think one of the reasons it was so intense is because I didn't have my normal support network to support me. But also, we've been living this for the better part of 7 years, right? So for me, it felt like it was the first time I was going through that. For my husband, um, you know, completely understandably so, he said to me, "But well, we've been here before. We know what to do. We know how to navigate this." And that was for me very devastating, because I'm feeling like I'm going through this the first time. But your support network gets fatigued, and they try their best. They can only help you so far. And then we were talking one night, and I was saying, why isn't there a type of AA for people with anxiety? Because our support systems get overwhelmed, and some of us don't have support systems. Like, if this happens to me now, I don't want to go back to square one. I've been to therapy. I know I already have the psychiatrist. I know the lifestyle changes, but I've relapsed, and I need somebody who understands what I'm going through. There's somewhere where I can go, where I can say, this happened. I can't believe it happened. I feel down on myself. It's okay not to be okay. We really need these communities, because it's so difficult to try. And the most difficult thing in life for me, I think, is to try and explain to somebody what it feels like to have a panic attack that hasn't had it or is not wired that way, because it's not a rational thing that you can explain. You have to live through it to understand how devastating it is. And to have this kind of community where you can go to and you can feel safe to share this, and you can have this connection, it's so needed. And there isn't something like that.
Nothing.
Well, now there is, because
but it's online, right? I mean, so this is another thing I've noticed. Like, since COVID, people have gotten really used to doing online therapy or online coaching or online communities like the one you've built. But I really feel like when you're at your darkest, you need a real human next to you.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think this is what makes it different, because I'm very, very, very active on the community, and I'm very pro kind of speaking as human beings to each other, doing live calls, doing live Q&As. And it's good in two ways. One, because it gets us connected. And two, it gets us out of one of the main symptoms of anxiety, which is isolation. So it forces you in a way to speak to others and to say, okay, can we get on a live call? Can we do a live chat? Of course, it would be amazing if you can have in-person support groups. And I truly wish and hope that I can make something like that happen one day. But for now, this is the closest I can think of doing. And then also just be completely stumped that there is no such thing for people to go to.
I mean, it would be amazing, because like you said, Alcohol's Anonymous, right? They have, it's a community-led, based system. I've never been, but I'm assuming, or this is what I've heard, like, and they meet like every day or a few times a week, and people can come and go as they please, and everyone has some sponsors or some friends there, but it's kind of anonymous. You don't have to give your last name. There may not be a psychiatrist there. Like, it's more of like a community-led place where people just talk and try to open up as best they can. And when you think about alcoholism, it's a terrible thing, and so is drug abuse. But actually, there's so many more people just dealing with mental health issues. Like, the numbers of people dealing with mental health issues are probably higher than the people dealing with alcoholism. I'm not sure. Maybe someone could check, but like, that's like the forgotten people. Like, there's no one there to help anyone who's dealing with the 6.5 million Americans dealing with anxiety. Like, where's that community base, and is there going to be stigma around going for help?
Yeah, and what really stumps me is the communities that are there are, like I said a little while ago, taking you back to the beginning. You know, I don't need to hear all the first steps again. I know all the steps. I've been practicing all this. I'm doing the meditations. I'm eating my protein snacks. But because of my wiring, this has now happened again. And I need to speak to somebody else that is in this phase where I am now. And I think that's what is so unique, to take that example again about AA. You know, you have people that have just started their journey, that have been sober for 20, 30, 40 years. Like there's this connection and this community of understanding where you are in your healing journey and being able to connect with like-minded people in that space and phase and stage of where you are on the road.
And people who aren't going to judge you if you relapse or fall down, right?
Yes. And I think that's why I really have such a really bad relationship with self-help, because again, one of my traits is being a perfectionist. So when I was diagnosed, I thought, well, I got this. I can read all the books. I can do all the practices. I can meditate. I can follow all the rules. I'm really good at following rules.
It probably just made you more anxious.
It made me a lot more anxious. And, like, the story was always the same. You know, the message was, I was where you are now. Then I found this golden ticket. And if you do this, you will never have a panic.
And there's no such thing.
There is no such thing, because maybe, yes, if you're in a phase where you're burnt out or you're going through a period of chronic stress and you just need a little bit of help to get through this stress. But anxiety disorder is a diagnosable mental illness, right? So that's the way you are wired. You can't change that. Like, I'm not broken. I don't need to be fixed. I just need to know how to read my manual.
And every manual is different.
You know. So what usually happened is I would relapse, and I would be, because like if you have a panic attack, it's not just a panic attack, it's the panic hangover that follows, and that can last anything between 3 days and 2 weeks, depending on how bad your attack was.
Walk me through what a panic hangover is. That's the first time I've heard that.
So a panic hangover is like when your body goes through a panic attack, your levels of adrenaline it's so high. Like, it's like you've run 200 kilometers in 15 minutes. Like, you're mentally exhausted, you're emotionally exhausted, you're physically exhausted. So when you come down from that and you crash, you get really depressed. Like, you can't get out of bed. You're a shell of a human being. You get migraine attacks. What happens to me sometimes is I get really nauseous. I vomit a lot. You're so fatigued. Like, it's too difficult to lift your arm off of the bed. I'm usually like down in bed for 3 days straight. You feel guilty. You're dealing with a lot of emotions. Why did this happen to me again? What am I supposed to do? You have to go through all of the steps from the beginning. And you're dealing with those behavioral changes. All of your old fears come back. So I don't want to eat. I don't want to see people. And I have to, again, go through all of that and get myself into a space where I'm able to function as best as I can.
Pulling yourself back out of that must be incredibly difficult.
It's really, really hard. And it was a lot harder when I subscribed to all of this self-help, because the message to me that I gave myself then was like, okay, if this person can do it, then obviously I'm doing it wrong. I mean, I didn't meditate enough. I wasn't positive enough. I missed a step. I didn't see the signs.
Oh my God, you're putting all that pressure on yourself while you're trying to recover.
Yes. So you have all of this guilt. And the biggest shift for me came when, one of these episodes happened, and I think it was like my 3rd day in bed. And my husband came in and he's like, well, we're going to look at this differently from now on. We're not going to read the self-help anymore. We understand this is how you're wired. And we're just going to, when this happens, say, you had a bad day. It sucks. You had a bad day. Tomorrow you get up and you get to try again. You went from having a bad day every day to a bad day once a month, to a bad day once every 3 months, to a bad day a year. So we're just not, we're going to look at it this way. And that made the biggest difference.
That it's just okay. And it happens sometimes.
It's just okay. It's just the way I'm wired. We know what to do when it happens. We know what follows when it happens. We know how to navigate it.
This idea of like trying to fix ourselves is not helping, is it?
No, because again, we're sending ourselves this message that you're broken, and you're not. You're just wired differently. And there are a lot of gifts that come with that.
I always like to say we're all beautifully broken.
Correct. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. In our own strange ways, we're all beautifully broken. But no one's going through life, just sailing perfectly without any storms.
Nope.
No.
I mean, I would love to meet the person that is.
He's probably an Instagram influencer.
Yeah.
Nothing bad happens on social media.
Nothing.
I mean, do you ever, I mean, how have you reconciled your childhood? I mean, how have you dealt with the trauma that's happened there and how it, I guess, ushered in these panic attacks and this disorder? Because I mean, I'm going to assume that without the childhood trauma, maybe you wouldn't have been diagnosed with the panic attacks and the disorder.
That's how it was explained to me medically.
But I guess maybe it could be, right?
Probably it could be.
Yeah.
The honest answer to that is I haven't yet. I'm still trying. I think I'm taking small steps, like small wins along the way. For example, one of the big wins for me was understanding that what I really, really need most is to feel safe. And feeling safe to me means being at peace and having security. And that came about by recognizing, okay, you got out. Mm-hmm. It's okay.
You got out of your childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not there anymore. You survived it. But again, that's one of the things of panic disorder, right? You learn your triggers, you work with them, but there are triggers that you don't know, that things that set you off, right? So I think about 2 months ago, I had a small setback, and I just couldn't understand. I was like following the steps, and I was thinking, I mean, nothing changed. I'm not overly stressed. I was doing everything right. I didn't see any signs, and I've been, I've gotten really good at reading my body and listening to my body. And when I thought back to it and I went to my journal and I was like, okay, I usually go back and I write down everything I did that day, all the interactions I had, so I can try and piece together what it was so I can learn from it and know this is a trigger. And I was watching a television program, and there was this older guy that was the protagonist, and he said something to the effect of, "You must hate me." And it clicked, and I thought, you know what? Just before my abuser disappeared, he said those exact words to me. He came to me, and he asked me if I hated him. And that obviously triggered something for me.
Wow.
But, you don't always know that. Like, for example, if I get hungry, I get shaky and I get dizzy. I associate that with a panic attack. That's a trigger, so I don't. I always have a protein snack with me that I can navigate. But this kind of trigger, I can't navigate.
Yeah, because you don't know what's going to be on TV next.
So, I mean, I obviously don't go out there and try to trigger myself, but sometimes things just happen, Sometimes I'll walk in a mall and somebody will pass behind me and touch my back by accident in a certain way, and I will feel triggered or nervous. And I'm starting to recognize that that's also okay. That's just the way I'm wired. I have the tools in my toolkit. I'm learning how to read my manual, and that's okay.
Have you been back to South Africa since 2020?
Yes, I've been back once.
Mm-hmm.
Once. And we're going again in December.
Okay.
Yeah, my husband still has his offices there, so he goes back quite frequently. One of his offices are.
Does it trigger you at all when you go back, or you see your own family or anything like that?
I have to do a lot of inner work before I spend time with certain people, and it can get very difficult for me. But again, I'm so blessed to have such a good support system because there's so much value in communication. My husband and I have a word. Now I forget the word I'm thinking in Afrikaans. Code words.
Oh,
We have
yeah.
code words,
Yeah.
but he also knows my tells. Like he can see when I've gone from stress to anxiety to panic. Yeah. And I mean, he knows the whole story. So I prepare myself for it. I meditate a lot. I do a lot of inner work. I never miss an appointment with my therapist. I do everything I can to be as much in a healthy space as.
Because, I mean, people who have gone through childhood trauma like that, I mean, it's not uncommon for them to cut their family right out of their lives.
I have got a lot of family ties, and I'm having a very hard time with that because you have this guilt, right? Because a lot of what happened in my childhood was also very much to do with gaslighting. So I'm always doubting myself. Like, did I interpret that the wrong way? Was I too fast in making this decision? Was I too harsh? What if something happens to this person? I'm going to feel guilty for the rest of my life that I didn't make peace. Like, I just put all of that on me and I forget what the other side's contribution to it was. So I've been, especially the last month, having a lot of doubts about the people that I have cut out of my life. But then I have wonderful people in my life like Jeanne, that's helping me navigate those decisions and understanding if those are healthy decisions for me to make, to let these people back into my life.
Mm-hmm. That'll be a huge process for you if you decide to let them back into your life, because you're going to have a lot of extra work to do, right?
Yeah, a lot of extra work. But yeah, that's a very long journey, and that's something I'm not ready to make any decisions on soon. It was already a huge decision to cut them out of my life 3 years ago. So it's just more from like a moral human perspective. Life is short, and forgiveness and all of that.
No, fuck all that. No way. No way. No way. Life isn't, I mean, yeah, I'm of two minds. I think, like, you know, maybe we should all do the work and keep people in our lives, but then I just feel like some people are just too toxic.
It's not healthy for you. It's not healthy for your soul.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. Like I've definitely, so I've dealt with some shitty people in my life, but they haven't been family members, right? So I don't have to see them, and I don't have to talk to other family members about those family members. But I've found it like very easy just to cut people out, and then I just don't think about them ever again. And and that's kind of nice. But I guess like a therapist or someone would say I'm avoiding dealing with them.
I was
but
gonna ask, how do you do that? How do you just not think about it? For me, I can't even imagine that. Like,
I just get absorbed with my own life. I mean, this is LA, right? Like you just, you know, we're all narcissists. You just worry about your own shit, and you just cut the rest out. And you know, I have family members that I'm really close to, and you know, I have family members that, you know, I have to take care of and things like that, or whatever, and those just become the things I care about, and the other people don't. This is where like that empathy knife is quite sharp, right? It's just like, which side are you on? And it's been very easy for me to just let go.
I'm a little jealous.
I mean, I've had it both ways. I mean, I've had a therapist tell me that's super unhealthy and I should try to reconcile. And then I've had another therapist being like, I don't know anyone who can just cut people out of their life and not even think about them. Congratulations. Like, that's a hard thing to do. Yeah. So it's hard to kind of know, you know, which side of that it's on. But, you know, as long as you sleep at night and wake up in the morning ready to be a productive member of society, then I guess you must be doing something right.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And my husband is very much like you. Yeah. And I think that is what upset so many people in my life when he came into my life, because he is all for, like, I will not even give it a second thought if I have to cut you out of my life.
Well, it's like staying at a bad job. You know, like, do you stay at a bad job and get up every morning feeling like shit, commuting to a job you hate, working for a boss you hate, with coworkers you hate, with clients you hate, and then making that 30 years of your life while you're also trying to work on yourself? There's no way you're going to be able to work on yourself if you have to live through that job environment, right?
Oh, yeah.
So then maybe getting rid of that job is kind of the same as getting rid of other people in your life where you just kind of cut it and then you don't think about it anymore and you just move on. And I don't know, like that's obviously not medical advice or therapeutic advice. And I'm a complete novice at all this, but these are like little things that may or may not have worked for me along the way. But obviously too, like dealing with much, much less trust issues and much, much less trauma. And then, going through what you went through at a young age, no one at 10 has the tools to figure that out. And again, blaming yourself and stuff like this at an early age is, I guess, what most people do because they don't see the 360-degree picture of what's going on.
But it's also the abuser's plan, right? Is to make you doubt yourself, is to make you not talk, is to make you be quiet. Even if you're an adult and this happens to you, that will have an effect on you. But a child is so impressionable. Add to that it's somebody in a position of authority to you, and you just assume, like, obviously this person is right and I'm wrong. He's the grown-up.
Let's unpack that for a second. How terrible is our education system for teaching us to respect adults, and then for those adults to abuse us, take advantage of us? Because like I went to Catholic schools, we had issues with Catholic schools. But one of my friends in particular was abused. Like we had issues, and this whole thing of like trusting adults because they're adults is fucking ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like we should be deadly afraid of all adults.
Oh yeah.
Because very few of them are out looking out for our best interests.
That's very true.
Yeah.
And I must say, like, I feel in my own way, I've become a bit stronger and made a shift ever since I had my little girl. Because obviously, like, I didn't have postpartum depression. I had postpartum anxiety, surprise. But a large part of that was that I just had this massive fear that the same thing would happen to her. And I went into this super protective mode. I didn't want her to go anywhere, to anybody to pick her up, or like it was really bad. My husband had to have many conversations with me about that. But that did help me get a bit stronger because now I can see it. It's like the same as my human rights career, right? I can fight on somebody else's behalf, but I can't fight on my own behalf. Now I have this little body to protect.
Mm.
And over my dead body, will this ever happen to her?
Well, that's interesting because I've never thought, obviously the trauma that you went through as a child, you've had to do the work for yourself, but then it's like, how do you parent after that? Like, how do you protect your child all the time? It's impossible. Like they're gonna go out, they're gonna meet people, they're gonna go to school, they're gonna have friends after school, they're gonna come into contact with people every day of their life, and all you have to do is try to make sure they know not to trust adults, and then you kind of have to let them go, right? I mean, how do you deal with that with your anxiety? I mean, it must be really challenging.
It was really hard for me when she was a lot smaller. It's getting a little bit better because now she's getting to the age where we can have conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I am perhaps brutally honest with her. Like, she knows every part of her body. She understands it's private. She understands, like, nobody gets to, see her undressed or in any, like, she needs to tell me immediately. And she does. Thank God she got so much of my husband's genes because she's a smart kid and she doesn't take nonsense from anybody. But that doesn't mean to say that there aren't bad people in the world and bad things can't happen. So, I have a lot of conversations with her about it. She has a lot of books that we read about it. And, I've been criticized for that a lot because putting that on a small child is a lot. But it's the way you speak to them. And I just feel like she's so small and she's so impressionable and she's so easily manipulated at that age. She needs to know and to be able to recognize the monsters in the closet and to be able to tell mommy about it when she feels something is not right. And she has stood up for herself. She has told me when she feels something isn't right, and I really appreciate that, and I hope I can continue that kind of relationship with her.
We talked about it a little bit earlier with South Africa having a kind of a terrible reputation of this patriarchy and this kind of male-dominated society where sexual abuse and physical abuse against your female partner is kind of par for the course, which is disgusting. Yeah. I mean, how Does it put you at ease at all knowing that you're not raising your daughter in South Africa?
A lot. That's, it's hard to move to a different country. You miss your culture, you miss your language. Like you said yourself, South Africans are very warm people. We're famous for our hospitality. And that's something that's hard to find. I've lived in many countries and it's really unique. But there's no replacing the safety my daughter has in Portugal. It's so tranquil and peaceful. We live in the countryside. I think our village population is 300 and something. So it's so nice to be able to raise her in such a completely different environment from what I grew up in, and just be safe, peaceful, and in a loving, good home. And so many people come to our house and for dinners or whatever, and they always say our house has such nice energy. And that's the biggest compliment for me, because I grew up in a house that somebody was always angry, things were always breaking, somebody was always acting out in a bizarre way, and to be able to have grown up and live in a house where there's just so much peace and love and respect and understanding. I'm just so grateful I get to give that to my daughter. And then in a country where she can be so safe. Like, you still have to be careful, of course, but it's comparing it to South Africa. I mean, It's completely different.
I don't think a lot of people really understand how dangerous South Africa is.
Well, the recent studies have shown that white South Africans have the highest anxiety level in the world.
Are you serious?
Yes, because we're always subconsciously anxious because of all the violence. I mean, 2 weeks before we moved to Portugal, my husband was coming home from work. It was the middle of peak traffic, 500 meters from our home. He was at a traffic light, and a guy just got out of his car, walked to the car in front of my husband, and just shot the guy.
Jesus. And he's sitting...
The bullets went off my husband's car. Thankfully, none of it hit him. But these are the type of things that you deal with. And it's so sad, because it's such a beautiful country, amazing people.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to raise my daughter there. There's enough to deal with in life.
I think a lot of people are realizing that. Like I was living in Dubai for many years, especially during COVID, and it's amazing the amount of people from South Africa specifically, but also from other parts of Africa, that moved to Dubai during COVID to get away from violence. And a lot of people who had a little bit of money, they could maybe buy a property, get a visa. They have this like real estate investment scheme. You buy a property, you can get a visa. But then again, you're in Dubai, you're quote unquote safe, right? Like, there's no gun violence. It's pretty. I mean, it has its issues, but it's a very physically safe country to live in, the United Arab Emirates, and a lot of people were coming out of parts of Southern Africa and South Africa specifically, just looking for safety.
Yeah. I mean, when we first moved to Portugal, we would never, ever, ever consider buying a house like that in South Africa, because it's just so unsafe. And it's like a, not a farm, but like a small holding, I guess is what you call it. And the fence is about this high.
Yeah, in South Africa, you need a 20-foot fence with barbed wire.
And with an alarm. And for probably the first 6 months of living in Portugal, we were so anxious sitting outside at night, because we were always like hearing every single sound, watching everything, thinking, okay, we don't have an alarm. We wouldn't even know if somebody came across the fence. And we had an alarm company that would come in to the house and just check if everything was okay. And this poor guy one night came in because he saw the gate was open. I think it didn't close for whatever reason. My husband just stormed across the lawn because his first instinct was, this guy is here to hurt us.
Right.
Yeah, the company fired us. They never came back. The security company fired us.
Yeah, that's how on edge you are, even, just growing up in South Africa.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now it's completely different. Like, now when we travel, I have to remind myself, okay, be cautious, be safe, check your surroundings, because it's weird how quickly you get used to, if you're safe, being safe in that way.
LA is a strange beast. There's pockets of it that are super safe, and then pockets of it that are terrible. And then at night, everything changes.
Oh, and everything is bad.
Well, I think in this town, it's very, very hit and miss. Like there's just, I think the United States is pretty interesting, like scary for random acts of violence. Like you could be living in a nice neighborhood and have everything fine, but the gun violence here is on a level I don't think it's quite as bad as where South Africa is, but the gun violence here I think is terrible. I did a podcast conversation a couple weeks ago with a man who made a documentary film all about gun violence in South Central Los Angeles and just how kids grow up in gangs and stuff like that. And you feel like that you're far removed from that if you live in Beverly Hills or.
But it's just here.
Yeah, it's just 3 miles, 5 kilometers down the street, like, but whatever's going on there filters into all the other parts of the city, right? And then you get drug violence and you get gang violence and you get carjackings or robbery and that's all happening here, but people don't even talk about it anymore. And I wonder if there's just some kind of agreement among all the media, that they're just not talking about it.
Just don't say anything.
Yeah. Because it's I think people have gotten, desensitized to it. I mean, like 10, 20 years ago, everyone was talking about it and people were having rallies and people were trying to get guns off the street. And now everyone's just
kind of accepted it.
Well, other bigger issues have come along, right? Like people are worried about elections and worried about...
you've got a big debate coming up tomorrow.
And cost of living, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing too. It's just like the middle class are being completely destroyed. So everyone's just trying to pay their bills and they can't worry about other things.
I have to say, it was weird for me because I lived in America for a while and I loved it and I've always wanted to come back. But I was just telling my friend before I came, now when I come, and I come every 2 months for my businesses, I really feel scared. Like I don't feel safe. I really check many times where I'm staying, where do I park, and that didn't used to be that way for me. And also, I'm shocked at the prices of things, but that's very much on par with South Africa. Actually, I'm shocked at like the price of milk, the price of bread. Every time I go to a store here, I'm like, wow, okay, that's intense.
I think back in the day when you could buy a home for like $100,000 or $200,000 and have like a 4-bedroom home and 2-car garage, you had time to worry about other things. But now, like,
Is
no
that
one
possible? Can you still do that?
No, definitely not. I mean, I joke about, like, I was joking the other day with my dad. Like, he's just like he said like the difference between his generation and my generation is massive. He's 78. I'm in my 40s. But the next generation coming, like the kids now that are like 8 or 10 years old, like they're never going to own homes, right? Unless they've come from royalty. Like just the cost of living for people to have to kind of get through. And of course, when you're worried about, and I also think too, like when you're worried about feeding yourself, you don't worry about anything else.
Yeah.
So how do you worry about gun violence? How do you worry about politics? How do you worry about the banks screwing us over? Like, how do you worry about all these other things when you can't even do the basic?
Mentalized.
Yeah. I think there's the psychiatry, the psychology of the masses is shifting, right?
Yeah.
And it's terrifying. That's a bit of a tangent though, so I didn't mean to go off too much. I mean, so back to you and your journey. I mean, where do you think you are on a scale of 1 to 10 from being completely diagnosed with this in 2015 to finding some happy, medium where you feel comfortable living your life every day?
It depends on the day.
Yeah.
No, that's the honest answer, really. It depends on how well I listen to my body. And I try to do that and to pay attention to that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But life happens and I'm not always in control of everything that goes on. And, I've been in the entrepreneurial space for over 20 years. It's a very stressful space to be in. So, marrying that with my panic disorder, it's a tricky kind of tightrope to walk. So it depends on the day.
I can't imagine being an entrepreneur with all the uncertainty that you must face on a daily basis and then still knowing that you have a panic disorder that you have to manage and maintain. Like those dual stresses would be enough to give someone a panic attack. Like,
yeah,
not to make light of the situation, but that's not the easiest path to go down, right? Like where you're an entrepreneur and you can't control things every day because shit happens to you as an entrepreneur that you have no control over. You're just trying to build a business and help people and things like that. And then also too, you have to manage your triggers and manage the things that are going to set you off so that you can be healthy enough to run your business and be a effective family member. Like that, that's got to be a lot to carry.
That is, but I think I've learned to take myself out of the box that kind of defined me, in the sense that I'm totally okay with announcing and accepting my limitations. Because many other people have strengths that I don't, and I have strengths that they don't. I'm never going to be a super assertive, like crush the competition kind of person. I'm never going to operate like that.
It kind of sounds like you were a little bit like that in South Africa with your legal business that you set up.
I don't think so. Like my philosophy has always just been to be brutally kind.
That's how you deal with the trauma and the everything.
And just good people come my way, and sometimes bad people come my way, and then I call upon the people that can be more assertive, and they help me. And then when they need me to be more diplomatic, I help them. And I just try to manage it that way and understand that, again, I have limitations. And my biggest lesson in that was not recognizing the limitation and thinking to myself, okay, no, I can just power through this because I cannot miss this work for this day or this deadline, and then forcing myself into panic and panic hangover and being useless for 2 weeks instead of just giving myself that 2 hours or that one day. So I think that helps me a lot. And also, I'm super opposed to balance. I think it's a myth. I don't think it exists, especially for women. It's just, if you think about having balance in your life, being the perfect mom, perfect wife, being an entrepreneur, being successful, managing a panic disorder, like that's a lot to put on yourself in a day. That is creating anxiety. So I try to just be in the moment I'm in. I'm always going to have more work at certain times than others. I'm always going to have more time to spend with my daughter certain times than others. And that's okay.
I think there is something to be said for just rolling with the flows of life and not trying to control everything.
Yeah. Just like my goal basically is to take anxiety out of situations where I can. Mm-hmm. There are some situations where I cannot. But the situations where I can eliminate some anxiety, I work to do that.
Give me an example of that, because I'm ignorant about this.
So, for example, I cannot control going into a meeting with a brutal person that causes me a lot of stress and anxiety.
Or a podcast host.
And I don't know how to deal with that. Like that I cannot control, okay? But I can control the fact that I can speak, for example, to my daughter and say, listen, mommy's having a tough time at work, and I'm going to be working a lot of late nights for the next 2 weeks, but then it's going to be better, and then we can spend some more time together. But for now, I'm really tired. If you want to lie next to me and give me a hug or hold my hand while you draw, that's perfect. That anxiety I can manage. Mm-hmm. So those would be my kind of two examples of things that you can and things that you can't. Like you can't control other people's reactions or personalities or the way that they are or show up in a certain situation in life. But I can control the things that I know would possibly cause me anxiety and trying to take those out of the frame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Trying to manage the relationships that you have some control over.
Yes.
And communicate your way through them, and then whatever happens in the rest of the world that you can't control, you just try to take it in stride.
Yeah. And also just my husband taught me this. It's like just making peace with the worst case scenario, because a big part of my anxiety is uncertainty. And if you were to think about every outcome to a situation you're stressing about, it's actually quite helpful for me to think about the worst way it can go and make peace with that, because then I don't need to stress about that anymore. I already know how bad it can go, and I already understand what I can do to mitigate that or not. And it just helps me to see it that way and to understand, okay, it can go really well, and the worst it could possibly go, which very rarely happens because my mind is very imaginative, and making peace with that and just understanding that it's okay.
I used to have a little trick. Like I used to always think of a worst case scenario, and then when it wouldn't go that bad, it was like a little win.
Yeah.
And it was just like building the little win after little win after, yeah. And that was like a little psychological trick because so for example, in my business, I want to do a TV show. I write a proposal. I send it to 100 people, right? I get 98 no's, okay, and 2 yeses, and then I try to negotiate. Like that's the general way of doing business. But those 98 no's are fucking devastating.
Yeah, it's horrible. I was just going to ask you, how do you deal with that? Because I struggle with that.
And that's the thing. Like I think that's where the shield comes up. It's just like, okay, no problem. It's not the right time. I'll come back to you next year or the year after, and we'll try again. And then you just go on to the next one and on to the next one. But this kind of like worst case scenario, like, oh, no one's going to want this. And then, okay, someone wants to have a call. Okay, that's a little win. Okay, someone wants to have a second call with another one. Okay, that's another win. And you just start building these little wins in a way of keeping yourself motivated to keep stepping forward. But the no's, like, they can be devastating. But it's been, again, like, I guess I've created this external persona, which drops when I'm in here. But this external persona of that part of work where I just don't care about the no's.
Yeah.
And then it ends up just not caring about anything or anyone, right? Like it expands into the rest of my life, which I'm sure I'll have to deal with at some stage. But it helps me just deal with the ruthlessness of the rejection.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm going to try that.
Yeah. Cause when you're trying to ask people for money to do things, 99% of the time you're going to have a no, right? So it's like, how do you wake up every day and still try to communicate with all these people and knowing that the no's are coming? And then one of the other tricks I've done is I try to tell myself for every 9 no's, there'll be a yes. So I try to stack my no's. So I try to like reach out to people, get a no. Okay, that's 1. Reach out to people, get a no. That's 2. Yeah. So I almost gamify the no's, knowing that if I get to a certain amount of no's, the next one could be a yes. And then it's like a little win.
That is amazing. I love that.
That's how psychologically unstable I am. Not to make a joke, but I mean, that's like a little...
talking to somebody with panic disorder, I think I got you one up, so...
You do. I just didn't want to make light of it.
No.
But it's a little it's a little hack that I figured out a long time ago that I just... Because you just get a lot of no's. So I was just like, how do I deal with all the no's? And it's just like, well, just stack them. Like, just get as many no's as you can. And then after you have like 20 no's, statistically, the next one's going to be a yeah.
Yeah. Oh. That's so cool. I'm going to try that.
I hope it works for you and for anyone else watching, because it's helped me a lot, because I used to be devastated by it. Because when so in your case, you're trying to help other people, which is insane. And I'll come back to that in a second, why I think it's insane. But you're trying to help people, but I'm just trying to tell stories. So like the world or people's lives don't better or worse based on what I put out into the world. Maybe some people like that.
I disagree with that, but
but it's not like it's not like saving someone from depression or something like that, which I would put at a higher, calling. Like it's amazing if you can use your story to help other people, which is what you're doing. But I just make some TV shows, and for people who have a stressful week, they sit down on a Saturday and they can stream me suffering in Brazil on a motorcycle. Like that's how I make people feel better. But again, just this constant, like, trying to get out there, trying to get the work, trying to tell these stories and things like that. You do have to build some coping mechanisms that hopefully don't turn you into a cold person to be around, right? And I've had that, people tell me that a lot. But it's I don't know, it's helped a lot with the work.
This is incredible. I'm so excited to try it. Like,
yeah, just stack your nose.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that.
So again, the work that you're doing and like helping people, like where do you, when people come to you or you use your story to reach out to other people who are also suffering from similar trauma, I mean, how effective do you feel putting your story out and listening to other people's trauma? Like, do you, because you're not a therapist, you're not a doctor or a psychiatrist, but your story and the way you've dealt with it and the way you've learned to manage it is incredibly useful to everyone, right? So I'm curious, like, how people have been responding to you and what you've been through, and how they've been able to maybe take something that you've learned along the way and add it to how they deal with their trauma.
So I think there's been like two types of responses. The first one has been people reaching out to me from my old life, like my consultancy and career, and just being completely shocked. Like, we would never have said you have anxiety. You're so calm. You're like always so kind of, put together and following
You're
the
masking.
rules. And yeah, and that's the thing, right? You learn to deal with your storm inside of yourself because you don't want to burden anybody else. And also, once you physically start to show that you are panicking, kind of sends a message to my brain of, okay, this is real, it's happening, you are having a panic attack, so let's avoid that. So that's the one way. The other way is that it's just created such a sense of real community, I think, because it's allowed me to try and heal from my story by talking about it, having a more cathartic experience with it, but meeting other people that have gone through similar or other types of trauma and that are perhaps further on the healing journey than I am, or earlier on the healing journey, or at the same point. And it's just so amazing to get these messages of support from people saying, I really know how you feel, and thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for doing this. It's really hard to share this, and it's hard to talk about it, and it's hard to not keep it a secret anymore. So to see people react to it that way and understand that it's so needed, and that there are so many others like me that thought that they can't speak about it, or that they can't say it, or that they don't know what to say or who to say it to, is just so incredible. And yes, I am not a therapist, but that's the part of the problem. You spend 50 minutes a week with your therapist, right? Which is amazing, and I recommend it to everybody. But what do you do when you leave?
You still have to deal with yourself.
Alone with your anxiety. What do you do when you wake up from insomnia at 2 a.m. and the whole world is sleeping and you're having a panic attack? Like, what do you do then? And to have this kind of open line of communication with others that understand that and feel like they can speak to you and to each other, there's just like a kindredness in it, and this strange sense of victory, almost like, haha, we won.
Yeah, a shared sense of community, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Has anyone from your high school days or your university days ever reached out to you, like, since you've kind of been more open about your past and been like, well, we had no idea?
No, but at the same time, I didn't have. I mean, I had a group of friends in my senior year, but the key thing my friends would always tell me is, you're such a great friend, Jeanne, but we don't know you. You never share anything about yourself. So you can tell me everything about you, and I would never tell anybody. I would be your greatest kind of confidant, but nobody ever knew anything about me. I just don't open up. So I think there's always kind of been a wall between people from my past. And then the second thing is, just logistically, I'm not on Facebook or a huge Facebook person, and I think that's where most of them hang out. So, and I've moved to another country, so I don't think it's really reached them, I guess.
Yeah, because I'm just curious, like, because of the problem South Africa has, statistically, there's probably other people you went to school with that may have been dealing with other things, and I'm just wondering if that ever came up, because I mean, in a school of 500 kids, there's no way you were the only.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, statistically, that's impossible, because there is a huge problem in South Africa. We all know it. This happens to way too many young people, and I'm just curious if anyone had ever reached out, from those days.
No, but again, like, I wouldn't say I have a super open channel of communication to that. But what has happened, though, is as I've gone through this journey and learned, like, when something like this happens to you, you get amazing spidey senses. Like, you see things and you feel things about people. like your radar goes off. And if I think back on some people I've known in high school and weird behaviors and things, I can now recognize, I think maybe I wasn't the only one, something obviously was going on. But again, then to speak about it, I mean, you're in high school, you want to be cool, you don't want to be the weird kid with the strange problems, and like a big part of that was my grandfather ran the tuck shop at the school. So he saw my friends every single day. He ran the tuck shop.
Jesus, he was at your school as well.
He was the owner of the tuck shop, him and my grandmother. So I wasn't going to say anything. I mean, I would be, a co-conspirator in the crime or something like that. It was just devastatingly embarrassing. And I mean, this went on for, 2 or 3 years. So, I don't even allow myself, like I've gone there once, but I don't even allow myself to think about what he was doing in that tuck shop and how many kids may have been alone with him. Like, I just don't even go there, which is probably wrong because I feel a lot of responsibility for that because he was mine and he came of me, But yeah, that was a large part of my silence. And everybody loved him, he was like the cute grandpa that had the tuck shop. So nobody would have ever suspected something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have been against you all the way from the start.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's terrifying that you had to deal with that during the day and then also go home at night and have that. Like, I can't imagine, you must have just felt imprisoned.
Yeah, there's nowhere to go, and you feel trapped, and they're so clever because my mom, she was doing her best. My dad was working away to provide for the family. She was working a full day job. There was no such thing as aftercare or, staying somewhere. And I was a child. I wanted to do extramural activities. I wanted to go to ballet. I wanted to go play with my friends. And he would use that, he would go like, well, I'll take you to ballet. You can sign up, but then you have to come and visit at my house after, or I'll take you to your friend's sleepover. I'll come fetch you.
It became like leverage.
Correct. And it was the perfect leverage because there was just so much control to be had.
Yeah, no, that's an evil human being, to say the least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's dead now, so sorry, but.
No. It's important that someone who can be that manipulating is no longer with us.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that, you came by today and we didn't just talk about skincare.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
It's nice to get an idea of, who you are and where you've come from and stuff like that. And obviously, besides trying to create a community for people who are dealing with anxiety and this stress and panic attacks and things like that, you also have your own skincare line as well. Like, when did you decide to build out this career?
Like I said, I always knew that if I'm going to change my path, it has to allow me to take ownership of my diagnosis so I can at least get away from that guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the main symptoms, and there are many symptoms of panic disorder, is really sensitive skin because your body releases cortisol, adrenaline, your nerve endings are just below your first layer of skin. And obviously they're overstimulated and they're sending kind of the wrong messages then. So your skin is always burning, itching, scratching, breakouts, a lot of like skin sensitivity issues. Sensitive skin conditions like rosacea, eczema, shingles, they all get worse with stress. And I thought, okay, well, I love this ingredient I used to use in South Africa. I am in a new country. I can't find anything that doesn't upset my skin. I know I need to have a challenge. This is for sure a challenge. So I went back to school and I did my certificate in cosmetic chemistry and I created this line for dry, sensitive skin, but I call it a line for anxious skin because it's really born from one of these symptoms of my panic disorder and trying to have something small and physical that you can do to just help at least one of your symptoms on a daily basis.
That's a great story, to the way you've kind of recognized that that's one of the symptoms of your anxiety and your panic, and then trying to help, people who might also be dealing with that. Yeah. It's a nice little project to have, and it also kind of allows you to share your own story.
Yes, it does. And it helps like in many facets of the healing journey. Like, you can practice a little bit of mindfulness while you're cleansing your skin and all of that. And it's free from literally everything. So I really enjoyed doing that. And also just I enjoyed creating something beautiful and creative. I didn't have I was known in the human rights industry for being able to make very creative projects because I worked with a lot of youth. So like very creative ways to get them interested in voting, learning about democracy and all of that. But I lacked like a physical kind of creative output. So it was so nice to be able to design something and to be a little bit more playful and not as serious, and just have that kind of sideline where I don't always have to be so serious and so stressed, and just be a little bit playful.
It also gives you like a sense of control too when you make a physical product. I think like I've talked to some other people who create things, and they just said like they came out of a part of their life where they weren't in control. Things were happening to them that they had no control over. They felt like life was just throwing them around like they were in the spin cycle of a dryer, and they had no power over themselves. But then when they started to make things, it felt like they were somehow gaining some part of their life back, like some control again. Maybe it's a similar thing. I don't know.
Yeah, and also for me, keeping your mind busy, with something other than, where do I go from here? And it was also a little bit of a victory to me. I never had science in school. I never had biology. I barely passed math. I was just really not very good with that. And when I did the certification, I cried a lot and regretted it many, many times. But when I was able to do it and I got that certificate, I felt so proud of myself, thinking that I was way too stupid to do this. And then here I am, almost 40, and I did the chemistry. So that was a cool moment for me.
That's amazing. So it's just building these little like wins, right? It's just kind of like getting that control back, like, or feeling like you have some direction that you're in charge of, I think is super important. Again, I mean, I don't know about how the panic attacks and anxiety fit into that, but I think like feeling like you maybe have some control is probably helpful.
Yeah, very helpful. Yeah. Very helpful. And the panic attacks for me now, since my realization of it's just a bad day, I see it almost as a guest in my mind, like there are many good things that come from it. Like I have very heightened intuition. I can see things in a situation other people can't because I'm so alert to it. And I get to give this part of me a seat at the table when I need it, and to tell it to shut up when I don't. And I just try and see it as that. It's just like this extra part of me that's just along for the ride, And
hopefully it listens to your directions.
Yeah. It's like that sponger that's never going to move out, so I might as well get used to it.
So if someone has been through what you've been through as a young person and is also dealing with anxiety around it and things like that, what kind of advice would you give them? Someone who's late teens, early 20s, who had been through something similar to what you'd been through when you were a young person?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is you're not broken, and you're not alone. And whatever you can do and however you can make that happen, get into therapy, because that's usually where you will find your road forward, whether that be hopefully a support community or creating a support community for yourself, or getting yourself out of like maybe a really intense, challenging moment that you don't want to be alone in. that is something we're very lucky in after COVID. There are so many online options for therapists. And on my community, I'm always updating the support documents where you can go to find a therapist, to find a community center or a counselor near you. So that is really step one. You have to do that. The longer you keep it inside and the longer you don't do that, the worse it's going to become.
So the most important thing is just to tell someone else. To tell someone else that you can depend on for some kind of therapeutic discussion around it.
Yes, tell somebody. I would actually recommend tell somebody you have no personal relationship to, like a third-party therapist or a counselor, because many times with us, it's often a person in position of trust to you. And it's difficult to have that conversation with your other loved ones because it's difficult for them to reconcile that this person could have done something like that. And that makes, one, your trauma worse, and two, you start doubting yourself. Did it really happen? Did I imagine it? So I would honestly recommend that you try and talk with a third party that is completely separated from the situation and has no kind of skin in the game, except helping you and listening.
Yeah. No, I can't imagine, because obviously if you were abused by a family member and then you went to another family member, that other family member would probably just try to protect the abuser, right? Like,
yeah,
they don't want to.
That's not your situation, but still.
Yeah.
But even if it isn't, it's such a difficult thing to admit and to say. It's sometimes so much harder to say that to a loved one than it is to say it to a stranger. And the first thing you need to do is to kind of get comfortable with that conversation in your own mind before you have difficult conversations with people that you are not equipped to have at that moment of the breaking.
It's good advice. Yeah, that's not easy. No, I mean, well, if anyone is in a position to give advice, it's you, right? I mean, because you're working through it.
Yeah, it's a journey, and if you're still stuck, you can always come to the community. I will always try and help you any way I can.
Where can people find your community?
It's DocJeanne, DocJeanne.com. And there it will redirect you to the community. And if you are not able to pay the fee for the course or the community, we offer scholarships for everybody that needs help, that can't afford it. We give 10% of each fee back towards paying for somebody who can't afford to join or to take the course. So please don't be scared off by that. Send me a mail. I will help you. And
then where can people find your skin line?
Figgy Beauty, FIGGI.com.
Okay. So, and is there anything else today that you wanted to share? I mean, we went deep. We went deep.
Yeah. I almost want to apologize to you. Like, I mean, it's probably such a cliche, but somebody asked me recently what made the biggest difference in my life and what helped me build my career. And when I think back of it, I really just want to say that there really is no cliche in kindness. Everything that's happened in my life, every good step, everything that's put me a level up or given me an opportunity is directly because of somebody that's shown me kindness. And I try my best to give that back, because you never know who you may meet along the way again in 10 or 20 years from now who you may need their help. So never underestimate that, because apart from everything that's happened, I still have these moments of like honest, pure kindness that have really, really shaped my life. And there is value in that.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing it today.
Thank you.
So now we can go to this one, and we go to the wide. You can see it here, so we can show everyone we're in the same room.
Oh,
we're not doing this remotely.
Oh.
And we shake it out, and I say thank you very much for coming and sharing with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.